I am super excited to welcome you guys today to Zakinova Team Podcast. And I am really honored, Jamie, that you took the time out of your busy schedule and made the effort to be here in Queens, New York, in this amazing podcast studio with Rob, the home inspector that I have the privilege of meeting and working with now for a few months. I would like to introduce you both to my audience because you guys are new to my crowd and they don't know who you are. But the reason why I pick very, very elite individuals, I should say, is because I pick and choose who do I find that has really significant knowledge in what they do. And Jamie, when I first met you, I have to say, you were like a gem.
Oh, thank you.
Right away, I kind of like connected with you and I felt like you were amazing at what you do. So everyone, I want you to meet the one and only Jamie Heiberger Harrison. She is the attorney in New York City who runs a very significant operation that is real estate plus litigations. She has multiple locations, but the main location is in Manhattan. And one of her home locations, I should say, that's closer local to our clients, that's easily accessible, is in Port Washington.
That's
right, Jamie?
correct. That's correct, Olga. And thank you so much. The feeling is mutual. The minute that I met you, I loved your energy, and it's so apparent here. And it was a great introduction and great meeting Rob as well. I've seen you you both were at my Port Washington office. I think Rob and I actually met briefly there. And it's great to be here. I've been doing real estate law for 35 years now, I think. And I started my business in the single and multifamily arena, so I've really been the ground up, and I just always had a real estate interest. So it's not just, for me, it's not just my daytime work, because even at night, I've never been big on shows and movies. What am I doing? I surf. I surf Zillow. I surf Street Easy. I want to know what's out there, and in my head, I'm one of those people that I walk down a street or I'm in my car, and it could be in California, it could be in Florida, it could be in New York. It doesn't matter where it is. I like to guess what the prices of things are. And I play games. And then, I look at it, I'll Google it. So real estate was just what I got into. I fell into it while I was in law school. And ironically enough, I worked for a firm on Court Street, which was a really big area to be in back in the day. You know, the real estate litigation firms that were going to court were located on Court Street at some point. That was back then. I'm sure some of them are still there. And I started working for Steven Sperber, who is one of my partners. I stayed there until 96. 96, went out on my own. Stayed out on my own, built a big business, very similar to the operation that Steven and his partners had. Landlord-tenant litigation, and in early 2000s, I opened up a closing division representing the sponsor of a major building in downtown Manhattan in the financial district, and a couple of other sponsors as well, and started representing all of the major banks, which we still represent. So that allows us the benefit of doing both the buy side, and if our client's getting the mortgage, we then can effectively walk them through that whole process because we're on the bank side too. And so, yes, we call that a dual representation. And yes, the bank, everybody agrees with it. Everybody waives any claims about it. But at the end of the day, the reason why they allow it is because we can't change the bank documents anyway.
Correct.
And so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I personally and professionally, as I said, I love real estate, and I'm always interested in knowing the ins and outs of any neighborhood because every neighborhood is different, and every town, as Rob knows, every town and village has their own rules. So the longer you're in the business, the more you're going to learn, and thankfully I've been building it up, and just grateful to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Rob, welcome back. You've been here multiple times already. Yes. We've done beautiful, tremendous informational episodes that were actually featured on Element Insider, which was really widely exposed to many agents in the industry. You are, on multiple occasions, were featured on Newsday, which I'm super proud of.
Thank you.
So that means that your knowledge and your expertise is acknowledged, not only within our local real estate community, but also out there into a newspapers world and the media world, which is very significant. I want my clients to understand that when they're meeting professionals like you, you're not just an average person. You work with your team, who is also known to be your family, and you're running a very significant operation. So let's take it away.
Excellent. Again, thank you very much. This is the third time I've been here, and it's been a pleasure. Every time we come in, your staff, the production studio, they're excellent, very, very professional. And yes, like you said, we are a family-owned and operated home inspection company that does commercial inspections as well. We're very well versed in the field. I have a dual discipline background in engineering, electrical and mechanical. Everybody on our team has some type of training in the trade. One of the other gentlemen that works with us, he's a civil engineer. My lifelong friend, Charlie, he's an electrician. My son has a construction background. So we have the players, the inspectors that are in the group that bring a lot to the table for, a good inspection from that point. But yes, we're family owned and operated. We've been doing it for over 25 years. And it's funny what Jamie said, that it's inherent in your blood, in your DNA, when you're either a real estate attorney or a home inspector. I take walks with my wife at night, and she's looking at houses and telling me, she goes, "Look at that! That roof has a dip in the ridge." And just as you go through it, just like you wonder on prices, we do the same thing. We're looking. I'm like, "Check that out," and I tease her and I'll say, "Look at that! What's that sticking up in the front yard?" She goes, "Oh, they got a buried oil tank." So it's funny how we interact with our professions, and I think Jamie touched on a really good point. If you're really passionate about your profession, you live, breathe, eat it all the time, no matter where we go, what we do, and with an engineering background, you have to always does things work the way they do. There's got to be a cause and effect, and it drives my wife, my whole family, my wife, like, why do you need to know everything? Because it's just like you want to know how much is that building, this town, and stuff like that. So it's definitely so true.
Whatever business that you work in, you should know as much as you can about your industry. I mean, that's how I've always operated. I did want to just tell Rob, as I'm sitting here, my phone is vibrating like crazy because I have a client who we're about to go to contract with. I was telling you before we started, it's a $13.5 million co-op, and it's I don't know that it will be a gut, but there'll be a major renovation done, and there's so many parts to it. It's like one of those classic sevens. It's probably 4,000 square feet. It's a full floor on Park Avenue, one of these older co-ops that Rob and I know. And I don't know, Olga, if you've done any older co-ops, but older co-ops have a really, really unique situation of having the ability to just provide us with tons of surprises when we start doing work.
So true.
Wow.
And so that's something but anyway, not to get off track, my client's vibrating on here because my associate's saying to me, my client's other name is Alex. Alex said you just left him a message and he didn't get the number. He wanted Rob's phone number. So,
wow.
So right
there's
here,
already interconnection.
On my first podcast
Awesome.
with Rob, I just got you a very nice inspection.
That's
so
great.
Excellent.
we're sending the introduction now.
Excellent.
But I've seen Rob, and you can just tell, look, Rob's a professional.
He's
I mean,
a
look at
real
him.
deal. He's a real deal. He actually inspected a house for me yesterday. There was also a very big surprise that he called me. He said, "Olga, the house needs to be completely got renovated." While this house is a gem that doesn't need any work at all. Yeah. But my client was generous enough to be smart enough to say, "I would like to do pre-inspection." Why? Because I don't want any surprises later on from the buyers.
I have clients that do that.
And
so yes.
I think it's just very smart to do that because if you're doing pre-inspection, it's easier for me to sleep knowing that if there is anything that needs to be taken care of, we are taking care of it up front, not when we already have negotiated an offer and spent so much time together. And now it's wasted because the owners have no knowledge of certain little details that could have been.
Unfortunately, there's very few owners that are going to do that.
That's true.
That's the reality.
So would you recommend, Jamie, as an attorney, because the main reason, let's recap on that, right?
Right.
The main reason why we decided to collaborate on this meeting today here in the studio is because we want to record an official information given out to people on YouTube and social media for people to understand that we would love to generously educate them and give them valuable data. That's not something that people pay you $500 an hour, right?
Correct.
It's something that they could get virtually, online. We will cover many topics, and I think it will be very valuable data that people should know and hear.
Before Jamie starts, I
Correct.
do want to make one statement.
Sure.
It's a proven fact that pre-inspected houses sell quicker,
For more
with
money.
less surprises, and from your standpoint, less dodging
less
the bullets
problems.
because it's up front. And all the houses that I've done pre-inspections for either my clients or the real estate professionals or even the attorneys, they'll say, listen, my client wants to put this house on the market. I know there's issues. I want to know what the issues are so I can have the
Upfront.
conversation with them. It's either the electric. If it's electric, it's unsafe, take care of it. So we'll do the service panel, we'll do everything, we'll get it done. When you walk in, now I walk in as the inspector, oh great, this is brand new electric. It just sets the tone.
course.
It sets the tone for the house that is done. Now your client yesterday, first of all, he was an architect. And Jamie, if I tell you, I've been doing this a very long time, I told Benjamin, I said, your house is on the top 10 best houses I've ever inspected. Now, he was an architect, and he was able to explain everything to me and show me steel main girders. We talked
he
about
was
how
the developer?
No, he's the owner of the house.
Okay.
So he was so proud of his house.
Yeah.
And honestly, there was you could eat off the floors. That's how clean him and his wife were, and the nicest people in the world. That house should sell with.
Yeah, we already have multiple
If someone called me
offers.
up and said, I want you to do an inspection on this house, save your inspection money. It's a good house. Of course, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But it's
But
a
I do
fact.
like to do that.
Well, listen, I personally really, when I make an investment, I don't bring an inspector. I might bring a friend with me. I just don't, because when I make but that's different. But I don't recommend that to my clients. I also don't lawyer up a contract when it's for myself because I know the risks I'm taking and I'm
Yeah.
making calculated risks.
Right.
That, okay, so if there are surprises, it's already budgeted for. But on a professional level, of course I have to point things out to my clients, but whether it's the electric panel that needs to be replaced or their plumbing in a townhouse in Brooklyn is the original plumbing from, let's say, 1920, and I could almost definitively tell a client under those circumstances that at some point they're replacing all of their plumbing.
Correct.
Because what will happen is there'll be a reason that the city will shut it down and it won't go back. It won't pass the integrity test. It happens all the time. Do you want me to answer your question in terms of my personal feelings?
Absolutely.
Pre-inspections are great I think they're great for townhouses. I think that they're also great for an estate sale, something. When I say estate sale, I'm referring to the units that are estate condition. An estate sale, what is an estate sale? An estate, when somebody says to me, oh, it's an estate sale because their 75-year-old parent died 2 weeks ago, that doesn't make it an estate sale. When you say estate sale, we're really talking about a situation where the seller knows nothing.
Right.
If somebody has their mom living in the same town as them and their mom's only 75 years old, and God forbid she passes away, that's not an estate sale. That's somebody that unfortunately passed too young and lived in their regular house that was maintained. That's not considered an estate sale. But people like to throw that out there like it's an estate sale, so we're not representing anything.
So what makes an estate sale?
In my opinion, an estate sale is when it's the parents of the empty nester parents who have been in the house for 40 years. One dies and somebody dies 5 years later. The house has never been upgraded from their original electric and plumbing. When you buy a house like that, you're buying an estate condition house. It's an old house. It hasn't been upgraded. Whether it's an estate or for me personally, estate, using the term estate should really only refer to the fact that the person who's selling it is not alive. And so what do we need to do about that? And in my opinion, it's not so much about the condition. It's more about the legalities of getting the right paperwork so that they can actually sell it.
So what if the elderly parents live there and they reno the house and it's all up to all, nice, done nicely, and they pass away, but the house is really renovated and done nicely, does it still become an estate sale?
Well, people will call it an estate sale.
Because the parents or the owner is deceased.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
They call it an estate sale, but the truth is that you have to be very careful because there's a state condition, so to speak, and then there's a real estate sale, meaning just that you have to go through certain paperwork of the county, of the state to go through that allows you to legally transfer title.
Okay.
Jamie, do you guys do a lot of probates and estate wills, trusts?
It's funny. I won't say I do a lot, but I would say over the last 15 years, I've had the opportunity. I taught myself how to go to probate, how to get testamentary letters, how to probate a will so that my client can sell the property legally and then obtain waivers of lien and get that, whether it's the federal government or the state, get all the documents together. I know exactly how to close that. I know how to do that piece of estate work. I do now regularly. If somebody owns a property here in New York and they lived in Florida, for example, and their estate is now settled in Florida, they go through probate in Florida, but they had this one asset here, that's a problem. And it's not a regular sale of that apartment in New York. Now what happens is that New York State is one of the very few that has really strict rules in this regard. They don't allow testamentary letters from another state. You need to do what's called an ancillary proceeding in New York. You need to get the paperwork from the other state, in this case if it was Florida, now file for probate here in New York. It's called an ancillary proceeding. If they die and they pass in New York and everything's in New York, I do the deals on wills, trusts, estate work. I like to do it on the more, I want to say, simpler stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that when you're dealing with an extremely high net worth individual, I think that it's probably more appropriate to be with somebody else. Can I do it? Yes. Do I think that it should be somebody that deals with high net worth portfolios? They're a lot more complex. I wouldn't prepare a charitable remainder trust. I just don't feel qualified. That's a more complicated structure. It involves tax planning. I do frequently now, though, I do what are called revocable, or also known as living trusts. I do those frequently now because I've been advising people that I do them. And when I send out my sheet to a client that I take in, one of the things I want to know if somebody's buying property is whether or not they have their estate planning done. And so it's one of the questions on our form, and that's also leads to now maybe I'm doing some work on that for them. But basically, once you own property, and certainly if you have children, everybody should have their estate planning done.
Absolutely.
Smart.
Now, what is the difference between probate in New York, let's say, and Florida?
It's not that there's so much different. I'm not licensed in Florida, by the way, and I haven't done a probate in Florida other than the fact that we did.
But I heard it's more complex.
It is, and I have had a family member that I've had to go through in Florida, but I wouldn't do it in Florida, so I can't really compare. New York is very complex, and it's a procedure. It's technical is what it is. I don't want to say even complex. It is technical, and the surrogate who sits, meaning the judge that's sitting as the surrogate in the court, in Supreme Court, in whatever county the property is located, they will have their own idiosyncrasies in terms of when they're looking at a file and signing off. So you're going to get rejected on a cross-out sometimes. If it's not stapled perfectly, you have to explain why. So it can be a process, but it's not as long as people say. I think that it's longer if you go to an estate firm. I think it's shorter if you just go to somebody that knows how to do it. So I know how to do that piece. Yep. If my client owns a property, for that one property, that's, and also then it depends on co-op, condo, or house, because different requirements.
So Jamie, going back to contracts, right? Real estate contracts, because the minute the offer gets accepted, inspection is done, we get the reports, and the reports goes to the attorney.
Correct.
And that's the main reason why we chose to have this discussion today, is because we feel that in many cases, attorneys could be deal makers or deal breakers, right? And so this is very important for you.
In most cases.
Right, in most cases.
See, what's important with that is when we send our report, you want to look at the summary section. You don't want to look at the loose doorknob or.
Correct.
She wants to see safety
The major
issues,
stuff.
buried oil tanks, termites, mold, asbestos, that kind of stuff that needs to be remediated.
Structure.
Of course, structure. And then Jamie will look at it and then have the discussion with the client. And a lot of times when we do inspections, and it's funny, before we started shooting, one of the attorneys called me from yesterday's inspection, asked me what I thought, because right away the buyers, everything's a problem. Like
Right.
everything. So the sub panels, the neutrals and grounds weren't separated. It's not a big deal.
Right.
But this is the analogy I gave my clients yesterday. Sub panel, neutrals and grounds have to be separated. I'm not going to get into the theory. I said to them, it's working, it's functioning as intended now. As I'm going to give you a perfect example. You get in your car, you put your seatbelt on, you're safe. You get in your car, you don't put your seatbelt on. If you don't get into an accident, it's a moot point.
Right.
So same thing with the neutrals and grounds in an electrical panel. They're there for a reason. So it's working now, but you want it to work properly when the problem happens. No seatbelt, accident, you're getting hurt. Same situation here. So I said to him, it's not a big deal, but I have to state the fact. Can it be a big deal? Yeah, if somebody gets hurt, it's going to be a big deal. Simple. Have the electrician come.
It's like not having GFCI outlets
Exactly.
in the kitchen or the bathroom.
Exactly. And then the best is when you're doing that, the house, the house was built in the 40s and it wasn't required. The people live here for, 50, 60 years. Doesn't matter. My clients are moving in with their family. Now it becomes a safety issue. Going back to the seatbelts. When we were kids, never wore seatbelts. We had kids. You girls are way too young to know this.
No. There was no seatbelts when I started driving.
Yeah. It was crazy.
I remember the requirement because I remember my first ticket.
Oh,
Wow.
no seatbelt.
So what year was seatbelt implemented?
I would say, I got my license at 17, and I would say that it was around then. So I'm turning 56, and it's 24. So that's, let's say it's almost 40.
40
it's 39,
years.
30. I'd say it's about 39 or 38 years ago.
She was
going
going to put out those numbers, and I was going to start doing the math and figure it. No, but it's all good.
So rules and policies and procedures, everyone has to follow it. Jamie, I have a question for you regarding this new policy that came into effect, right? March 20th of this year.
Correct.
And everybody were very, very conservative and to talk about this topic or not. But I definitely think that we should educate our clients how it really works and what attorneys do and what's our job as an agent and what's client's job. So let's talk about property condition disclosure and the credit that you guys were giving the buyers at the time of them signing the contract. Actually, no, at closing.
Correct.
Right? But what's happening? Why all of this really came into effect? Why property condition disclosure became such a big issue? If Rob was doing his job, giving you the report, disclosing information about the property, so now you as an attorney aware or know what's on that report, now how does it interact with buyers' ability to say to the owner, I don't want your $500 anymore. Now you have to disclose anything, hold your $500. Let's cover that.
All right. Well, first of all, it's not a choice. So while it used to be a choice of I can give you a $500 credit or I can make certain disclosures, that choice no longer exists. It only exists under the same limited exceptions that it existed previously prior to this new law. So the vast majority of deals are going to have to fill out the property disclosure form. And so it's not an option any longer. You cannot offer that $500.
Why did they take it away?
There's been a growing trend in terms of transparency. Not everybody is going to get an inspection. And so they want there to be an obligation on a seller to just state what you know. If you don't know it, it's okay. And it's really not any different. In practice, it's not all that different. I do want to say something, though, before getting into the details. The law is very new. And and I don't really think at this particular stage, given we're not even 2 months into it, if we think about how many sales there have been, even just in any one county since the effective date, there's probably very few, because if you went into contract before March 20th, even if you didn't close until June 20th, you didn't have to provide it. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about deals that went into contract around that time haven't even closed yet.
Mm-hmm. So anything went after March 20th, now applicable to disclose the full truth and nothing but the truth.
Well, it's not that. We have to be very careful. It's a lengthy form that asks questions, many of which the seller may be familiar with and may be able to answer. There might be words or terms that they're unfamiliar with,
understand. That's
like
a very good
easements.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know what an easement is. They can Google it. If they were to say check unknown, they can do that too, because who's going to know if there's easements and what kinds there are? They would have to ask a lawyer to do that. And it's not really, while there's certain, if it's readily available, you do need to find it out. So as lawyers, what's our role? Well, the lawyer for the seller has to actually provide the property disclosure form. And that form has to be filled out by every single seller of a 1 to 4 family home in the state of New York. And that form needs to get over to the buyer's attorney. I can't say when the process, where it's happening, and at what point in the transaction, because so far all of my sale deals since it came into effect, it's at different times. Mm-hmm. I've had some people send it over to me with the accepted offer already filled out.
Mm. See, that was my question to you. When does that property condition disclosure get handed over? Me personally, I think if you're selling your house, fill it out, and just like you're putting up the listing, put it there.
Yes.
So the person could read it and say, well, you have a buried oil tank. Before we even get in there and they're spending their money for an inspection, give them a little more insight to it. And then I haven't even seen one since March 20th. I think 2 houses had it out, and they were all
I'll tell
unknown.
you the problem with what you're saying, though, is that some of the major companies out there are not allowing their agents to be the ones to give it to the seller. And so while your opinion, and I'm not going to disagree with you, I'm not saying I'm disagreeing with you, but your opinion that do it in advance, the problem with that is that if you have these big companies out there and the company's rules are you do it, you have to. And what the broker has to do is the broker is under an obligation under the new act to advise every single seller that they're going to have to fill out this property disclosure form. Unfortunately, I don't think most of them are giving it to them because they're told not to and that it will come from the attorney. But if anybody out there that's listening, I do agree with you, Rob. In my opinion, I think that the prudent thing to do would be for the selling agent to send it over. You don't have to be overly aggressive about it. You could just say, just forwarding to your attention, obviously, look, I think people want information. There's a fine line between how much information somebody's comfortable disclosing before they have an exclusive necessarily. Right? Because you don't want it depends on your client. Some people get overwhelmed with too much information that you might want to do a little bit in pieces. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. I think that if they had the form, that if the seller could fill it out early on, it will be better off. And my guess is that over time, it will be
standard.
That's
right.
it. They're going to go in, they're going to give, all of a sudden it's going to be.
Just like lead-based form.
Yep.
Forget lead-based. How about agency? Your agency disclosure form, fair housing disclosure form, and now you're going to have your property disclosure form.
Yes.
And I think what's going to happen is that the same way it's under your signature lines now, you're going to have that there too, because you're all going to be throwing it at your sellers, because the reality is, to Rob's point, why wait? If they don't want to fill it out, so don't fill it out. Then you're going to get into, which is me and all the lawyers here probably are at, which is when are you getting it? So for me, what we do is this. our client hires us, they're a seller, we send them the form. And we advise them immediately that it needs to be filled out for them. And so we get it early on. And then we just, we send it over. Now, I haven't had the discussion in terms of, does somebody want me to wait to send it over? I just send it over when I have it. And I think that the biggest piece of advice I can give when it comes to this is that it's not a big deal. It's really not. People that want to hide
Any
issues,
imperfections, right?
hide issues, right? They want to hide the fact that the AC unit in the living room, that's one of the, built in through the wall on a building, let's say, you turn it on and you hear something, but let's just say it's not blowing any cold air. It needs to be replaced, right? You want to hide that, you're going to hide it. You just are.
But there will be consequences.
Not necessarily, because here's the thing, okay? Did you know?
It wasn't working. Of course,
And that's the problem.
It was working yesterday.
And right. So that's your problem. You close on something and it's irrelevant. Because what happens at the time of closing, whatever representations were in a contract of sale, they do not survive closing. So the only thing that happens then is you would have to make a case that it was a misrepresentation, fraudulent misrepresentation by not disclosing in the contract or saying something opposite, making a statement there haven't been any leaks in 2 years when in fact there were. And so you're in the same situation. It's fraud. Now, your buyer is in this position, okay, I bought this place that has leaks. And you have one scenario where they're vacuuming out the water in their house and the neighbor comes running over like, oh my God, it's so nice to meet you. What's going? Oh, I can't believe you have the leaks too. And they say, what do you mean I have the leaks too? I didn't know that there were leaks here. Oh, this house, they've been vacuuming this house, once a month for the last 10 years, right? Now, that's a fraudulent misrepresentation. That misrepresentation that leaves exposure for that seller existed before the property disclosure form.
Right.
And it exists now.
So now that's an issue.
What also exists, though, is if they checked unknown or, right, like let's just say somebody checks unknown. Let's say hypothetically they didn't live in the house for the last 2 years. And the lease and the contract says, have there been leaks in the last 2 years? And there weren't any. Or maybe there was one, and maybe they didn't know. Somebody's managing the property for them. I'm just saying now, someone has to bring a case for it.
Correct.
How many times in your life, I mean, we're all in similar, well, you're not, but we're in similar generations. And how many times have you had an issue with something being wrong on a product you bought, a car you bought, a dress that you bought, and a house that you bought? And what do? It may bother you, but you don't do anything about it. You're not bringing a lawsuit about it.
I think that's a great point you bring up. A leak, water, that kind of stuff. What my point is, let's say, for example, you live in a house for 50 years. The house was converted to gas. Now, you know that you had a buried oil tank in that yard, but you never abandoned it. You just added the gas, and nobody found that buried oil tank. So my question to you is, you knew that buried oil tank because you were using it. So now what happens when our clients move in and 5 years later that tank collapses, soil contamination to the next door neighbor, so on and so forth? That's a big issue. Very big issue.
And so the issue that you run into there is this. First of all, on your fraud claim, the statute of limitations had not yet expired, so you have that. The problem is that who are you buying from and where are they now? Right? Who are you chasing on this issue? That's the problem. That's really the problem.
What would you advise your clients in this kind of case?
Well, in that kind of case, when you had a representation that there was no underground oil tank, if I'm the seller of that property that sold it to them, I'm already putting a clause in there that representations don't survive closing. I'm going to be putting in there, notwithstanding anything in the contract of sale or the property disclosure form. Representations don't survive closing.
That's the legal side of it.
Correct. Correct. And
You see how having a good attorney is a key?
No, I agree. Now, I have a question about the property condition disclosures. Do you, as attorneys, ever fill it out for the
No.
sellers?
No, and I will never take that on.
I didn't think so. But I did do one house where they said, "Oh yeah, my attorney filled this out for me," and okay.
Yeah, that sounds like the attorney that you pay like $1,500 for.
Exactly. And you know it's so simple because everything that's on that property condition disclosure, I ask those questions. How old is your roof? Just tell me it's 17 years old. We're getting up on the roof. We're going to tell you, don't tell me it's 2 years old and I go up there and there's a ton of granular loss and there's shingles missing. Then
Right.
it's a problem. But it's a lot of basic information.
Yes.
When did you do the conversion? When did you do this? When did you change the water main? Now it's a copper, but you had lead or galvanized. So that's good information to share.
Right.
The rest of it is
If you know.
you might not know. Exactly. So the plumber came and did all of this work, but you don't know what he did behind the walls.
Correct.
I get that. We can tell because there's certain ways we're in the basement. We can look up. We can see things. We can look behind the plumbing. Okay, so you have galvanized pipes. Yeah, but you have all new PVC pipes in the basement, but you do have older pipes. And that's something that you as a seller would never know. And I agree
Correct.
with that.
One of the situations that you run into, particularly in New York City, I'm not talking about, forget houses right now for a second, but you just brought up a point that it reminds me of that, which is the pipes, let's say. Now let's say you have, this is a very common scenario in New York, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Manhattan, combined apartments. So somebody combines the apartments, and there are two different requirements when you're doing work in New York. There's the requirements of a board. So if it's a co-op or condo, you have their requirements, but then you also have HPD and DOB. And DOB requirements for how work gets done is not...
Go back because people might not know.
DOB is the Department of Buildings, and the Department of Buildings governs the regulations in New York City, which covers the boroughs, for what a owner, contractor needs to do before work begins. And so when you're combining units under a co-op might not require you to file with DOB, let's just say. Now, in my opinion, if you're combining apartments in this day and age, there's no circumstance that you don't need to file something. You need to file. Because number one, you need to file for an ACP-5 to demo a wall. An ACP-5 is a test, by the way, which Rob could speak more of, but basically it's an asbestos test. So no matter what, it's hard not to file. But what you see a lot in New York is these combined apartments that are combined with board approval, but they're not combined through the DOB. Now it's 20 years later. I know what I've done. I'm curious as to what your recommendation is. I mean, there are situations, look, if it's newer, I literally have had plumbers go in there and they find where the connections are that were capped off, and they open the wall. It's really only like a 12 by 12. They need, like you said, they need to see, did they use what did they use? Is this new? Is this the proper plumbing? Because what happens is that once they're combined, if they didn't file for it, maybe it's 20 years ago and the plumber's out of business. How are they going to now file for it to get their certificate of completion for the legal combination?
Right. So what Jamie's talking about is when you have these older buildings and you're combining the units, buildings
A and B.
Yes, the buildings are over 100 years old. The heating pipes had asbestos on them. So now you want to take that wall down between the two buildings. So you're starting to peel back the layers. Now you open up that wall and you see a heating
Two
pipe.
apartments.
Yeah, you see that the common wall that they're sharing. Now you open that wall up and you see that there's asbestos on these pipes. Well, what you're supposed to do is stop because now you're in a building with
Well, they
many,
would
many
test
units.
First, though.
Well, you can't test unless you open up the wall.
No,
If it's behind the wall.
no. When you do the ACP-5 test, they use a laser. They don't go. They don't do it. They don't touch it. They don't do it. They don't. They might take a tiny sample or something, but they're not. The ACP-5 test. You can't do any work in New York City with you. In order to get a demo permit, you need an ACP-5 done. An ACP-5 done is never done until after the closing. No seller is going to let an ACP5 be done before they sell their house, because then you're going to know if there's asbestos or not.
Right.
So that's never done. In order to get the demo permit, New York City, I'm not talking about any of the suburbs right now, but New York City requires that form is filled out. So they go in there with a laser, they'll shoot down. It could be feet down there where you may have had linoleum tiles from way back. From asbestos stopped after 79. So prior to 1979, just like prior to 1978, as Rob and I both know, there's an assumption. There's an assumption in any property built before 78 that there's lead paint. There's an assumption that any property built before 79 could have asbestos. Whether or and then the question is, Rob can get you the details about that, but does it matter? And the answer to the question is that asbestos and lead that are not exposed are not harmful. They're harmful when they're exposed, and they're harmful when they're not properly abated. So your choices are you encapsulate, which basically in a nutshell just means you're building over it, or you have to lawfully abate it, which requires a lawful lead paint abatement company and a lawful asbestos abatement company.
That's what you're...
Right, that's what we were talking about. And when they get to that point, when they identify it, now they have to take that wall down. It has to be done through an environmental specialist company where they come in, everything's under negative pressure.
Isn't that the person we interviewed?
Yes, they do that. Yeah, Dave and John. And then it has to be addressed and handled because you don't want that asbestos in the air. Then it becomes friable. Now you have other buildings, even out the window. If it goes out into the environment, you want to capture it. So everything goes through HEPA filters. It's a big process. But it's funny you said about asbestos. If you look it up, I think it's in the last year or two, our brake pads on our cars used to have asbestos.
So crazy.
It's crazy. So they're getting rid of all this other stuff. Meanwhile, there's zillions of cars out there, brake pads, and when you look at your rims, you see that dust on your rims on the car. It's asbestos. No more. But asbestos is a wonderful, wonderful product. It's the effect, the health effect on it that's bad. Right. It's the best insulator. It's tremendous. You got brake pads on the car. You got the brake pads on the car. You don't want those brake pads to overheat. So the asbestos keeps it from overheating. Great, great, great insulator. It was on wires. It was on tile floors. It's also in a lot of the popcorn ceiling because the texture of the fibers of the asbestos gives you that ability to do that. The fiberboard cement shingles on the exterior of the house, they have asbestos in it. Okay, what are you going to do? You're not going to start ripping it off. Just like Jamie said, encapsulate it. So I tell my clients, yes, it may contain. And you as an attorney, I never forget this story. I talk about it all the time. When I first started writing reports many, many years ago, I would state in there, asbestos, mold. I got a phone call from an attorney, and they said, why are you saying this is mold or asbestos? Did you test? And I'm like, no, but I just know it is. He goes, I'm going to give you a point of advice. Now, this is many, many years ago. Till this day, that gentleman recommends me. He goes, do yourself a favor.
Presumed.
He says, possible, maybe.
Presumed,
unless,
they say in court.
Correct. We say possible asbestos-containing material. So what happens is, then you have to further evaluate it. Ever since that day, 20-some-odd years ago, I put that word in, and it's like you get out of jail card free.
So possible if it's not tested.
Correct.
Well, the law defines that any time, I'll give you a great example. You go into an apartment or a home in New York City with a child who's under the age of 7 in the apartment, and you see peeling paint. The law in New York says it is presumed lead paint.
Wow.
Presumed.
What
So the
about...
And they write that on the violation. It's a presumption that it's lead paint. Now, the owner of the building or that unit has to go in and test it because it's presumed. Because lead paint affects children under the age of 7 and under.
Wow. So wait a moment. This is maybe a stupid question. So anytime we see chipping paint when we go to apartments or houses, does that mean that this is...
If the building was built prior to 78, then there's a presumption of lead paint in New
And
York.
I'm going to explain to you. If you go to a paint that's peeling,
Right.
if you take it and snap it in your fingers like a potato chip, most likely it's lead. The paint we use today is latex-based. It's more rubbery.
Yeah.
And this is me and you talking.
Oh, that's so
You
interesting.
follow? So I know what I have to put in my report, but if I go to a house that was built in 1920 and we're down in the basement and I see the old heating pipes and I look at that insulation on it, I'm going to tell you, Olga, you have asbestos. But when you read my report, it's going to say possible containing asbestos. So here's my thing. I bring up to the attorneys, okay, we know we have asbestos. We have 100-year-old heating pipes. Are we going to remove that asbestos from the old heating pipes that are 100 years old and are leaking? No. So let's pump the brakes here. And now you're talking about an old steam unit. So let's pump the brakes here. Let's think this through. This is what I would do if I was buying the house. I'm not going to spend $10,000, $20,000 to remove asbestos from old heating pipes. And we have a old Brooklyn house with 3 floors. Top floor cooks in the wintertime because you got the steam on. This is what you're going to do. You're going to get rid of the pipes. Now, if you get someone that knows what they're doing, they could wrap it and put it in an environmental safe bag and take it to the dump. But if you want to remove that and keep everything underneath it, it's a different story. So they could do this. Now we're done with our steam heat. Now we're going to run PEX. We're going to put baseboard heat. You could have 3, 4, 5. You could have 10 zones in the house. It's a good ROI, good return on your investment. Because when you want to sell the house in 10, 15 years from now, it's a non-issue. Bite the bullet. Plus, you're renovating. You're opening up this wall. You're opening up that. It's like we were talking about design work with your clients. Let's do it. Let's do it now. Yeah, it's going to cost you a little more money all day long. Great investment.
What are the deal breakers for you, Jamie?
As far as
Advising a client.
on inspection issues.
Yes.
I really have only one deal breaker. My deal breaker is gas. Because if gas has been altered, if somebody converted from let's say oil to gas, or somebody changed their plumbing because they have natural gas, but now they're changing their plumbing. You touch that gas line in New York, you better have used a licensed plumber. And if the work that was done required a permit, you better have used a permit. Because otherwise, if God forbid there's a gas explosion and somebody dies, the owner of the property and the contractor can go to jail for murder. Just like the explosion that happened in the East Village about, I guess it's been 5 or 7 years now. That owner's in jail for murder because somebody died. And instead of going through the proper channels of doing the work the way the work needed to be done, they didn't. And that's my deal breaker. And I even say, you know what? It's not even a deal breaker because guess what? As long as my client in writing, when they see in writing that, let's just say they're buying, I'm okay with everything, but I don't know how this was converted to gas. I can't find it. And whoever owns the property, if there's an injury to anybody, the owner's going to be responsible. So I would recommend you make them file for it before we close. If they don't want to and something happens, know that it could be criminal charges, period.
That's a really good point. You're talking about gas.
Yes.
Parallel that with electric.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing.
Yes.
If you get the work done,
Yes.
and it's not by a licensed
correct.
electrician, and when the licensed electrician is done, he has to file for the UL certificate, we're all good. Same situation. The house burns down from a fire, and they go in and they realize that somebody did it.
Murder.
It's done. So
Wow.
gas and electric. Definitely,
good point.
definitely.
Yep.
Definitely.
Any-
Water, all right. Nobody dies from
No.
a leak. Nobody dies from a leak in the roof. But people die from gas and electric. And Jamie's right. No go.
I think that one of the biggest things that I find, and where I think Rob's role is really important also, is everybody needs to understand that there's the legal requirements and then there's the work that you have done. And it's not uncommon, and in fact, I would say it's more common than not, and it really depends when the work was done. But if we were to look 20 years ago, and as I'm transacting back then, more times than not, the work that got done, the renovations that got done, nobody filed for anything. I would say 50-50 today. 50-50. People might pull permits. People might use licensed contractors. People might be doing the work to code. But it's still 50-50 whether they file, especially in a private home. So now what happens is that you have work that gets done, houses completely built sometimes, with nothing filed for. Now what do? Now my client comes to me. They're all excited. This place is turnkey. Okay? Yeah, the place is turnkey. So now as a lawyer, here's how I feel. Property that's built or renovated, but it's done to code and they used licensed vendors, if I can get comfortable, if somebody could say to me, yeah, we didn't use any of them, but they have. So then I'll say, well, did they use licensed contractors? Because personally, then it's up to my client. I don't really care if somebody used licensed contractors and the code only required that they be licensed, and there's not going to be a ramification for not necessarily filing, other than dollars and cents, let's say, or having to refile. If the place is safe, I have no issue. I do deals sometimes, an attorney, they won't even let their clients sign unless it says that all permits are done, must be closed out before the date title transfers. That's ridiculous.
What about certificate of occupancy?
Or
new constructions? I personally have problems with those.
I won't close. I don't recommend closing on a single family new construction. I would not close on without the final CO unless I knew exactly what was open and I had a really big holdback financially. Then I would escrow. I have a deal right now, been in contract way too long. Seller listed it way too soon because they didn't have their CO. This is dragging on. We should have closed 6 months ago, 8 months ago. We're going on. And it's a townhouse, like a $7 million townhouse in Brooklyn. But, right now would probably cost $8 million maybe. So, they don't want to walk away from it. But we don't have the CO still. And we were going to do a deal, and there was going to be a holdback, I think, of $500. And at the last minute, my client didn't want to do it. So we're not. We're just waiting for the CO.
Yeah. I'm coming across that. There's big property complex in Fort Salonga. They're doing about 40 houses. They bought this property, and they broke ground just before COVID happened.
Okay.
So the buyers got in at a lower, everybody knows the prices were much lower 5 years ago, and they, just like you said, they were coming up with these certificate of occupancy issues. But now the buyers on the upside, because their property increased 15, 20%.
I'm sure.
So they want to walk away from it? No. But now what's happening is, pre-COVID, everybody knows it was good. You can get good labor, you can get good materials, now you hit that wall with COVID, and now you can't get labor, you can't get parts, you can't get materials, you're getting inferior stuff. When I tell you brand new multi-million-dollar houses we walk in on, and I'm like, in my mind, it's like, this is not right.
Right.
There's cutting corners. I came across and I butted heads with the builder because from the electrical standpoint, what they did was they were coming in with the plastic water line, which is fine, but they were running the electrical ground to the water main, which is plastic.
Right.
Simple theory. It's not a conductive material, plastic. Do you know what he told me? He's standing, he's looking me dead in the eyes, and he goes, I don't care what you have to say. We passed electrical inspection last week.
Yeah,
I looked at my client. I says, listen, just like you said, I don't care what they did. I'm telling you, this is unsafe. He calls his friend up who's an electrical contractor. He goes, that's not right. To make a long story short, they corrected it, and all the buildings that were done after that, they did it right. Even if they had the plastic water main coming in, they had to run 2 grounding rods outside. You need redundancy on the grounds. We talked about this on the last one. Yeah. Until that day, and the builder thanks me. He's like, because it passed electrical inspection, I thought we were good.
Well, you know what? You can have a final CO on a building, and it can have unsafe and illegal issues going on. So you have to be really careful, because if we really go back, 30 years ago, think about how many contractors and architects have lost licenses, right? By signing off on stuff that's not to code. Where are all those houses that got signed off on, right? They haven't all come to market, so you still see stuff.
Yes.
Or I don't know, it just passes through. I don't know how it does, but it does, and there's plenty of times that there's things that are not done legally.
Yep.
And it's really, as Rob said, it's about safety, though.
And gas and electric is the tops.
This is my safety guy. I am more concerned when my clients talk about new constructions. If they don't have final CO, and let's say the listing broker is not disclosing the taxes, this is what bothers me, because if the taxes, let's say on the old house, were, let's say, $15,000 in Roslyn, right? Now, after new constructions, they're going to get to probably 30, 35, 40.
Well, the problem with the taxes, though, you have to be careful. With new construction, until the property is reassessed after it's final, taxes can go up. And in new development, now it's different. You're talking single family. So in the single family setting, look, as we said, I think that you really want your final CO no matter what, unless you're having that, unless you're going to have a very large holdback escrow to protect. But, I think the bigger problem is the smaller buildings in Brooklyn. Those are really problematic, I find, because I know who the small developers are, and there's a very large amount of small developments in Brooklyn that were done, and every single one of them, and I base it on the attorneys, because I know that there's attorneys that represent all of those developers, and every single deal I've had in any one of those developments, I've been told was a problem.
And what do? They just fold up and move on.
That's right. That's right.
That's
right.
We're doing one next week in Brooklyn.
That's my
Green Avenue or Green Street, one of those buildings. Same thing. If I'm buying a new construction, I want to know who the builder was and what kind of roots they have that they're going to be around, and they got to be
if they're not going to
accountable.
You need, on new construction, no matter how big the building is, if the sponsor doesn't have underlying financing that's tied to them getting their final CO, then they're not staying around. They're out of there with that last sell. You need to have, there has to be something holding the sponsor back to get the final CO. I mean, listen, some of them will do it. We have plenty of reputable sponsors in New York. They're doing development after development. They're not hiding anywhere. They're going to ultimately have to do what they have to do.
Those are the people you want to do business with.
Correct.
Ethical.
And good at what they do, because we do them, and some of them are like, who did this? Then you go to the other ones that
Same people.
Perfect. Like your client yesterday. Everything
perfect.
Pay attention to detail. You could walk in a multi-million-dollar house. I'm looking at the cabinets, and they're crooked. I'm like, what's going on here? It's nuts.
Well, this is why I always tell my clients, unless you build it, don't touch it. And I would rather you look at an old house, because you have full disclosure of knowing of what you're getting yourself into. Yes, you're going to get a little dirty. Yes, you're going to get a little ugly. But you're going to do it your way, and you're going to do it the right way. And this is why when it comes to the attorneys, we always say that, it's very important who's representing you. Because when the contracts come in, you guys are not neglecting those contracts just to make a deal. You care for your clients because you want that repeat business.
Of course.
When I represent my sellers, for example, and I am on both sides, where I'm, let's say, this client that you went to inspect yesterday, I have a listing, I'm selling his house, but yet he's also looking to buy. And every time we're going out to look to buy, I tell him, yes, no, yes, no. And he looks at me, he goes, why? I said, because I know every building, I know their financials, I know who the management company is, and I know how they operate. Some of them have very big financial problems. And you as a consumer, you as a client, are not aware of it. We are as brokers. And so when you buy this property and then you come back to me 10 years later and you ask me, please sell it, I don't want to look you in the eyes and say, you know what? I can't.
Yeah, but there's also, I think, though, that it's more about just disclosing and providing the information, because the client, look, I have clients that buy in land lease buildings. Is it a good investment? Probably not. But as long as I'm comfortable that my client understands what they're buying, then that's a different story. No different than my client that buys the house that was fully brand new, but nothing filed for. Big boy, big girl, doesn't matter. They just know what you're getting into, and that's it. And as long as they know it, then it's really okay. Like I said, I think that there's a ton of work that can be done perfectly, could be beautiful. Nothing was filed for. Not for nothing. If I was going to personally do work in my house, and I was going to renovate a bathroom, I probably would just hire licensed contractors and do it. Because no one's asking any questions.
Right.
They're just coming into my house. And so you have that a lot in a single family house. And I'm not saying that that's to code. If I go to sell my house and I added a new bathroom, I'm going to have to file for it. Or my client's going to take it as is, and I'll tell them I'll take it out. Because that's another thing, right? When you have that bathroom in the basement, it may not be to code, but do you want the house with it or without it? Right?
Right.
Correct.
Right.
What would be one single piece of advice you could give a potential buyer today that is looking to buy a property?
In regards to doing inspections?
Yes, legality, to protect themselves before the report's even done and come back to you. Some people just don't want to do inspections, period.
See, another thing when we do the inspections, obviously you're looking for the defects and the concerns and the issues, but you have a lot of first-time home buyers, and they don't know anything.
Right.
So we're educating them. It's not just
No.
the fact that you're looking for deficiencies or concerns. Educating them, showing them where the water main shutoff is. Whoever's living in the house, God forbid there's a pipe leak, just run downstairs, shut this off, then make your phone calls. Certain safety things, certain maintenance. So it's not only the inspection part of it is learning. You know, we all learn by owning. They never did. You know, and the generation today is very different.
I would say that the biggest piece of advice would probably be that when it comes to inspections, number one, you're not doing the inspection to be told about the cosmetic issues that are there. And I know that inspectors will do that, and they'll note a crack, they'll note a broken window, they'll note these things. And however you looked at the house and how you saw it, that's what you're buying. The cosmetic stuff that was there is staying there. It's not changing. I would prefer to it not even be on the report, but it is. Nonetheless, it's meaningless. I explain to them, don't get caught up in that. I also like to explain to a client that I would rather have the report and know the costs to correct it before I go to my other side. The reason being that depending upon the terms of your deal, it might be worth it asking for a credit rather than having your seller do the work. Personal opinion, I'd rather my buyers do the work after the fact.
Good point.
If it happens to be on a new development, it's a developer, then it might be different. They might be able to do it better, faster, cheaper.
Correct.
But a seller of a house that's selling an older house that all of a sudden, you know, their toilet bowl cracked in half and they have to replace it, well, guess what? They're buying you a $50 toilet. Seriously.
It's working.
They can put in a used toilet. They're going to put in a toilet that's the equivalent of what was there. So I'd rather, that would be my advice on inspections. Find out what, you know, and the other thing is, you really don't want to get too caught up. You really want to know what it means before you worry too much. And at the end of the day, the other thing is this. Be very careful when it comes to an inspection. A single family home, 99% of the time you're going to inspect it before you sign the contract. Townhouse, probably too. A condo or a small new development condo or co-op, not necessarily before you sign. Because the other thing to think about is that if it's in a co-op building, which I'm sure Rob agrees, you do a lot less inspections on co-ops. But in a co-op apartment, the owner's going to be responsible only for the walls in. And therefore, it doesn't matter. As long as we have the representations, it doesn't matter. And I would sooner do the inspection after contract in those circumstances, which we may be doing on that deal I was telling you about today.
Looking forward to that. That'll be fun. And you bring up a very good point. You're not replacing the roof. The condo is. So I always say to my clients, get the financials. See if they have reserve. Okay, so this roof, you have to replace this roof. This could be $500,000 for this type of roof. Are you going to get assessed, or is there a reserve for it? So I get into a lot more detail as, quote, you know, the home inspector. I give them the insight, and I say, discuss it with your attorney. Get the financials. Get the bylaws. Who's responsible for these windows? Sometimes that's a gray area. You have to do the windows, or they have to do them. So it's a gray area. Windows could be expensive.
Windows
so
are responsibility of a co-op purchaser.
sometimes.
Well, the problem with windows, this is just my own opinion. I don't really care what it says in the bylaws or the plan as far as the windows are concerned. When a client is buying an apartment, anything to do with windows, I tell them they're going to be as is, and if there's something wrong with them, even if it's the co-op or condo's responsibility, good luck getting it done, because unless it's a building-wide change, it's not
not gonna get
happening.
done.
It's just not. And you know, you have to be careful on that point, just FYI. Buildings in New York, older buildings in New York, Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue buildings are instituting plans now, and they already exist in certain buildings, that either before the sale or within 6 months after the sale or within 9 months after the sale, all of the windows in the unit need to be replaced. So these are really important things to look at too. And you have that on the electric panels too. A lot of the older buildings are requiring that the panel gets changed before the sale.
Wow.
Right, because the people that are living in there, they could have the old Federal Pacific stab block panels. It doesn't matter. But now you're buying it as, and Jamie's right. Now we're getting it up
So
to
is
code. We're getting it up to safety. Back to the safety issues, the
Yep.
gas, the
So
electric.
it's a must.
Certain things are a
Implementing
must, yeah. Certain situations are a must. Certain buildings are requiring.
Yes.
Hey, it's no different. There's been now it's almost commonplace. If you renovate a bathroom in a co-op or condo in New York, almost 90% of the time at this point, you must replace the branch plumbing lines.
You're dealing with so many different floors. They don't want to. You change it, and now behind the wall is the old galvanized pipe. So now they open it up. They're getting it down as far as they can go to the next one, and everybody does it. Eventually, you got to renovate everything, and it's going to
Eventually, it's going to be almost all new piping.
Exactly. But you can't do it until you start renovating it.
Did you ever get to the point where you advised a client not to buy? To the point where you don't even want to be representing them
Oh yeah,
with
yeah.
such contracts or
Yes.
a property?
Yeah, I've had
Any examples you could share?
but you're talking just condition now. Yeah, I had a situation. My client bought, there was major roof problems before they bought. He was semi-convinced that it was fixed, and, you know, we did just sell it for him. But it was a problem the whole time.
Wow.
And I warned them. But, you know, sometimes people just think they'll get it fixed. They're in for a good price. They like the location. They just are too emotionally attached to it, whatever it is. But that was one person. But from physical stuff, not very often, but a couple of times, yes.
And it's funny, Jamie brought up about the cosmetic stuff in the house, and she's right. I hate putting those in the reports, but here's the thing. The minute they move in, and they're like, you didn't tell us about that crack. You didn't tell us about this. Look at the report. We put it in there, and I hate to use the word CYA, but just we did. We saw it. It was there, and then you know the father comes in, and it's like, oh my God, the inspector didn't tell you this. What else didn't he tell you? And it becomes a downward spiral. So we put it in. We hate doing it. It's such a pain in the butt, but we got to put it in.
Yep.
And we put it typical minor flaws. It's not, you know, cracks in the foundation. We talked about that. Every foundation cures and cracks. It's common. It's when you get that deflected crack that's a concern. Other ones, it's just seal it to prevent water and moisture intrusion, and you move on. But case in point, you're right. You know, we want to hit the hard stuff. But
Jamie, what do you do with those that's unrepresented sellers that don't have even an agent to guide them, support them, and direct them to do the right thing? There is so much legality that we're dealing with. I mean, just by watching this episode, if anyone is looking to buy or to sell, they'll be probably getting dizzy.
yeah, it's a lot. A lot of
But
moving parts.
those that are, let's say, for sale by owners, have you had those when they are unrepresented?
In terms of what, though? In terms of how does it affect the inspections?
No, how they handle the whole process.
When there's not a broker?
Yeah, because a lot of times we get like, oh, my attorney will handle it. My attorney will help me.
You know, I think it depends upon the deal. I really do. I think that I always tell clients I prefer a broker on both sides of the deal. I really do.
Because then you become the inspector, you become the
Yeah.
broker.
I mean, depending upon the deal, especially on the sell side, how do you not have a a broker on, or I should say even especially on the buy side, either way, because somebody has to open up the door, somebody has to bring the client there. And at the end of the day, I just, there's too many pieces. Single family, you can get away with it a lot more than you can if it's a building. Because in your co-op and condo buildings, you really do need the brokers because there's so many documents that need to be collected and so many different moving parts. Whereas, single family, I do think you can get away with it. And I don't really care if there's one or two brokers, but you just want a broker that's kind of orchestrating
Overseeing everything.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what we do.
Otherwise, it makes your job harder.
Exactly. Well, not just that. It's not even about just my job. Let me tell every single property I've ever personally or professionally bought, I've always found them by myself, and I've always used a broker.
Even you?
Even me.
Wow. Do you see that? It is officially on record.
It's there. It's there.
Jamie herself, an attorney of New York City, finds properties on her own and uses a broker to represent her.
That's right.
Why do you do that? Why is it important to you?
Well, first of all, I don't want to go in there and make my offer and deal with my own negotiation at all. And for me, I think it's more a question of I don't want to you do things in different places, right? Like eating and going, right? I don't want to mix that. So I'd rather somebody else do that for me. I also know how many things I'm going to need help with.
Right.
And I want that person. I don't want somebody internally. I need the broker so that they can go there. They may have to meet somebody there. They may. It's just there's a gazillion things that can go wrong and needs that I have from the broker on it. So I'd much rather them put in the offer. I think that the brokers will get a better offer.
Why is it important to have you as a client representation from a broker?
Well, I just think that the brokers are the ones that they're out there. They're on the ground. They know the value. They know what's available. They know
the history.
Yeah, a good broker is going to not just know about the property, but they're going to they're going to have ideas for you. We were talking before, although we do have to cut down on this. I want to just raise this point. We were talking before about inspecting before you sell. I think that when you have that estate-like condition that's really bad, it's really helpful when you provide some form of a basic plan on what can be done to a property that is, let's say on the example of the property that Rob is going to inspect for my client. This is a classic 7 at least on Park Avenue. It's so broken up. There's so many different rooms, right? This room leads to that room leads to that room. That's typical old co-ops for you. Wouldn't it be nice if this is going to be a gut renovation, if somebody walked in to see this place that they're buying that's $13.5 million, if somebody spent some money and put together different floor plans, even elevations of what can be done. Right. Because who needs a 7-bedroom? Most people don't.
Correct.
I'm talking about on a classic 7. I was saying how I do think that one of the benefits, and you need the inspector too, because in order for a contractor to be able to have somebody draft plans as to what potentially you can do in the case of a 5,000 square foot classic 7 with 7 bedrooms and everything's all cut up everywhere, it's can you take these walls down, and then just the ideas of, giving them the ideas. Because I was saying, in addition to, potentially doing inspections before, another thing I think is really smart to do is when you have a property that's in need of such a gut, is giving a sample plan or two at an open house. Because somebody that's going to come in and spend $15 million would be more than happy to have an idea of what this is going to look like. That's not to say that they're not going to have their own people. Oftentimes, a high net worth person is going to come with their team. But a $15 million purchase these days, yes, it's a high net worth purchase. They might not be coming with the team, though. They may not know. Even people that are spending more. I've had plenty of clients that are coming in to make a purchase. They can be famous. They can be very high net worth. They don't have a contractor. They don't have an inspector.
Interesting. So everyone needs a referral.
Everyone needs a referral.
And this is what I got excited when I first met you, Jamie. When I came to your office with Tony and the team, right?
Absolutely.
I saw how you were like very friendly, very just open. You just very easy to talk to.
Thank you.
And I think that you have a lot of resources and connections. And so is the same thing with Rob and the same thing with us. And the main purpose of all of this that we are doing, right? And I want to thank you for your time is because we pour in so much time and effort and energy and knowledge into educating people to understand that there is so much information that goes behind every professional. And every single one of us, when we charge what we charge, I think we're worth every penny and more because we are protecting our clients by potentially getting exposed into something that could cost them a lot of money. So I want to thank you guys very, very much for joining me today. Jamie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for pouring your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been
Absolutely.
great.
And I'm looking forward to working with you down the road in the future and doing a lot of business together. And the same thing with you, Rob. Well, you guys came in with your team and we started working together and we're referring business to you now, which is really, really amazing.
She always brings up a good point where you have a good team together that you could depend on and rely on and communicate is really important in our industry. So
Absolutely.
Well, there
really
is
good.
more exciting episodes on the way. Everyone, thanks for watching. It's been my pleasure being your host. And now I'm welcoming amazing guests and looking forward to sharing more knowledge and information with you. Please continue to watch, like, and share. And there's more exciting episodes on the way. Thanks for watching.
Excellent. Bye.